So welcome everybody. Please let us know where you're joining us from. We're really excited. This is our first virtual event of this season. So we're really excited to get started. And we have Nicole working with us behind the scenes as well. So she'll be with you in the chat, letting you know what's happening and taking care of things in the background. So we appreciate your joining us this morning. And we're really looking forward to our time with Jacob. So this should be pretty exciting. We've never done this before. He's going to be out in the field, so to speak, walking us through a trip through the forest through some of the nature activities. So I'm going to get started here, and I just realized, there we go. And this is the book we're talking about today, the Book of Nature Connection, 70 Sensory Activities for all ages. And we'll just do a few introductions here. So my name is Sarah Reeves, and I'm the marketing manager for New Society Publishers. And we thank you for joining us today, either on Zoom or viewing our live stream on Facebook for our virtual nature walk with Jacob Rodenburg. So yeah, please continue to let us know where you're joining us from. We really would like this to be as engaging experience as possible. We understand that the virtual medium can be challenging to feel like we're having a participatory experience, but we'd really like for that to make that as much as possible as these virtual events allow us to. So during the event, please post any questions you have in the Q&A area, and we'll get to them as time allows. We will choose someone to win a copy of the Book of Nature Connection from those who post a question. So, and you'll also notice polls appearing during the event. So this is the first time we're trying them out. So we'll see how it goes. And you can also, we should probably have a poll if people actually like polls, but so we'll see how those go. So, and also all attendees can receive a 20% discount on the Book of Nature activities and the other book that Jacob co-wrote with Drew Monkman, the Big Book of Nature Activities, with the code nature20 at newsociety.com. And Nicole will post those links in the chat for you so you can easily find those books and use your code. In keeping with Indigenous culture and to build respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, we acknowledge that our office is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Sunamo First Nation, the keepers of this land since time immemorial. As settlers, it's important to recognize that although we call this place home, the Sunamo First Nation never ceded their lands to the Crown. An integral part of New Society's mission and vision has been to publish books for a world of change in a way that has a minimal impact on our environment to help build a just and ecologically sustainable society. For this work to remain authentic and meaningful, we acknowledge our settler privilege and understand the impact it has on the land and Indigenous people. I would also like to take a moment to recognize that today is the National Day of Awareness and Action for Murdered and Missing Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people. We have links in the chat to help you learn more and take action, and we encourage you to read the final report on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You can find out more about New Society and how we put people and planet first at newsociety.com. Nicole will also be posting links to our full land acknowledgement and call for decolonization, as well as our statement of ethics in the chat. Now, please join me in welcoming Jacob Rodenburg, Nature Sommelier and award-winning educator, Executive Director of Camp Kawartha, a summer camp and outdoor education center. He's also an instructor in environmental education at Trent University. He's taught more than 100,000 students and is the co-author of the Big Book of Nature Activities and the author of the Book of Nature Connection. And he is joining us from Peterborough, Ontario, so to take us on this virtual nature walk. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and welcome everybody. Maybe you can stretch your hands up and join the person above you in the computer or off to the sides. We're all connected. Anyway, it's a beautiful spring day here in Peterborough, Ontario, about an hour and a half northeast of Toronto. And, you know, I'm a little thirsty, so I'm just going to reach over here and grab myself a nice glass of wine. Cheers. Do you ever wonder how a sommelier, that's someone who enjoys wine, gets to be so good at wine? Well, they practice their senses. They might smell the wine and say, that's got a richly textured aroma. They might take a taste, roll it in their tongue and say, boy, that's foxy. And they might look at the color and say, that's got a deep red hue, a burgundy hue. Now, what if we were to approach nature with all of our senses tuned and primed so that we literally can drink nature in? I have a theory. My theory is simply this. We're spending so much time behind our devices these days. Really, we're only activating our sense of sight, and that is 2 dimensions flattened behind a screen, and our hearing. But those other senses get missed. Maybe we feel more complete when we're connected to nature. We are lonely when we're not. So today, the irony is not lost on me that I'm telling you to get out and use your senses and connect with nature from behind a screen. So do me a favor today, close your computer, turn off your phone, step outside and open up all your senses and drink the natural world in. You'll feel better. And studies have shown simply being in nature for 15 or 20 minutes, it makes us feel happy because it boosts our serotonin levels. It makes us more in touch. Richard Louv calls it vitamin nature. And studies have also shown that when we come back inside, we focus better, we cooperate better. There's every reason to get out and enjoy nature. So today, like a sommelier, we're going to focus on opening up all our senses so we can feel more deeply connected to the very life systems that nourish and sustain us. All right, are you a foot watcher? When you walk through the woods, do you look at your feet? I can understand you doing that because you don't want to trip and fall, but there's so much going on around us that we often miss because we're focused on our feet. So practice splatter vision. What that means is you might look over your shoulder here. You might look over your shoulder there. You might look up. You might look behind you. You might look down. But throw your vision all over so you have an expanded field of view. And you'll be amazed at what you can discover. Now, I've got a challenge for you because along the way, I'm going to take a look. I don't know if anybody can notice something in around here. Anybody? Yeah, there's a little mouse hidden. Let's continue along. That's easily done. You just get some magazine pictures of local animals, and if you can, laminate them and hide them. We'll wander around a little bit more. What else can you see along our trail that's hidden? Oh dear. Oh dear, what could that be? There you go. Ever wonder why an animal is more lightly colored on the bottom and more darkly colored on top? Well, that's called counter shading. When light falls on a three-dimensional object, it's the opposite. It's usually darker on the bottom and lighter on the top. So animals, to break their form, they're darker on top and lighter on bottom. And you'll see that with frogs. They've got a whiter belly, a greener back. You'll see that with deer, with fox. Counter shading. If Jacob had a petting zoo, he would not include one of those. Did you catch that? All right. Wandering around one of our trails. One thing I love doing with kids is I'll take a brown chicken egg and I'll color it, matching the color of the floor, because some birds like ruffed grouse, wild turkey, they lay their eggs on the ground. And of course, if it was a bright white egg, it would be easy to see. But if it's mottled and spotted, you are hidden. So I invite kids to make a nest and then hide their egg. So I've hidden an egg here. Can you see it? James is having trouble. You can't see it. Exactly. Excellent. Exquisite. Awesome. Well, when we're walking through nature, sometimes stop and try an old photographer's trick. which is extend your thumb down. You can even try that right now. And flip your hand the other way, extend your thumb up, and you've created a little bit of frame. Now, by isolating a little bit of nature, you see it in a new way and you appreciate it in a new way. Well, what can you discover through your frame? And sometimes to help you with that, we can do this. Grab some popsicle sticks and glue them together and create your own frame. And then frame something. Maybe it's moss, maybe it's a wildflower, maybe it's some bark beetle etchings. You could even take your frame and hang it up on a string. And then if you have an exquisite view, you give it a name. Like maybe that is Springatopia, because things are coming to life here in spring. Does that look lovely? What can you discover? Let's move along. You know, we humans can sometimes believe that we're the only things that tell stories and write, but there are stories written in nature. Animal tracks in the snow tell the story of what the animal was doing. Maybe the story of what the bark beetle was doing. So that's called a gallery. And what happens is a bark beetle lays an egg, the larva, and the larva begins to munch. As he munches, he grows, and that gallery line gets bigger and bigger, and where it ends is where it pupates, turns into an adult beetle, and off it'll fly. So check out the stories. Maybe there's sapsucker holes. You ever think about it? Woodpecker, a sapsucker, flies onto a tree and smashes into it with its head. Can you imagine that? That's gotta hurt. Luckily for woodpeckers, they have 2 toes up, 2 toes down, so they clamp on the tree. They have this reinforced tail, which acts like a prop. And they also have an extra strong skull. Their tongue is so long, it can't fit in their beak. So when it's not in use, it wraps around their skull. And the woodpecker pecks away, slips his tongue in the hole, grabs on to the bug, and hauls it back in again. In the case of sapsuckers, in the spring, they'll drill these holes, leave them for a bit, come back, and they'll eat the insects caught in the sap and the sap as well. Let's keep moving. You know, crammed in the back of our eyes are cones, special structures, and they're designed to see 3 hues of color: red, green, and blue. And it is the combination of those hues that allow us to see literally 2 to 3 million different shades. And sometimes we don't appreciate just how well we can distinguish those shades of color. So to help you in the book of Nature Connection, I have some color wheels. What you can do is go out with the color wheel, maybe photocopy it from the book, and then use some clothespins and harvest a tiny bit from here and a tiny bit from there, and see how carefully you can match the colors. Now, I've done a color for every season. So a color hue for the spring, for the summer, for the fall, for the winter, because there's always different colors at that time. And see how well you can distinguish colors. And I have another one too, and it's called the Green Sheen Challenge. In the spring of the year, it's just amazing how many different shades of green there are. You know, there's the light green of the new growth coming up. Here we've got trout lily, and that is a lovely plant. Looks like the skin of a trout with those mottled colors. So I'm going to send this to Sarah. It's not in the book, but there's a whole bunch of different shades of green. How many can you find? How closely can you get a match? You know, when we walk in the woods, sometimes all we see is a green smear. We forget that those green smears consist of different types of plants. And if we want to get to know nature better, it would take some effort to get to know the names of those plants. A name is just a beginning, but once we get to know its name, we can learn the story behind it. We can learn, oh, that's an eastern white cedar. Boy, That one makes a wonderful tea out of its needles. Its bark, its wood is rot resistant. For every tree species and every plant species, there's a story. It's a medicinal story, the story of how it helps wildlife. And the more that you are able to resolve those different shades of green into plants and learn about them, the more that you'll appreciate nature. Come on, follow me. You know, we don't appreciate how quickly life throbs and comes to life in the spring. What I love doing, and I invite you to do this here and now, is get a clothespin or anything and put your name on it and clip it. Clip it to a bud. And then come back tomorrow. Take a picture of it. Come back the next day. And you'll see how that will unfurl and change. So pretty soon, this is going to leaf out. And it might have flowers first, or it might have a little tiny leaf. And within a day, you'll notice the difference in growth. Over this way. Just wandered down the yellow trail. What I tried to do is put a branch across the trail every time I've got to stop to remind me, because otherwise I'll forget. Try this. At one point, close your eye, close one eye, and leave it closed for a few minutes. And what'll happen is your pupil in the eye that's open will be smaller, but the one that's closed, your pupil will be larger. So you leave it like that. And then after 2 or 3 minutes, close the other eye and open that eye, and you'll see different shades of color because one eye is more used to the light. And by the way, I'm just hearing a tree frog. You can hear it too. Right over this way. Okay, stuff is missing. Nothing you can do, and unfortunately, I'm not so eagle-eyed, but if you tie a colorful piece of thread or yarn over a tree, and I have done that, of course now I lost the tree that I did it, then what you do is you walk back until you can't see that thread anymore. Now recognize this, an eagle or a hawk can see that thread 10 times further than you can because their vision is so acute. So this helps kids appreciate just how well birds of prey can see. You know, the natural world is replete with beauty. The sculptor Andy Goldsworthy knows this. What he loves doing, this is Andy here. He hails from Great Britain. And he'll venture out into the woods only with his hands. He doesn't use any tools at all and create what he calls nature sculptures. So for example, he might find colorful leaves and arrange them in a rainbow shape. Here he's used thorns to pin those to a log. Here he's used thorns again, and he's harvested some cattails and then hung them so the light can shine through. He's really creative. In the wintertime, he might breathe icicles together and play with how light goes through ice. Or he might create beautiful mandalas. What can you create? And when you're done, let the natural world reclaim. Take a picture. Here's some that our kids have done. I'm sure you'll come up with something equally beautiful. I tried my hand within a few seconds to create an own little nature sculpture. The wind is it's it together, but Just made a few triangles and put them some cedar, some moss, some dried red oak leaves, just to play with contrast. So some of the words you can think about are things like shape and line and value and form and space, texture, color. So maybe try using some of those words as a cue. All right, so much to see in the natural world. So let's move over this way. You know, you were born with surround sound, and I love making my handy dandy portable sound catchers. They look like this. Put these on the side of your head and you can hear 10 times better. Don't have time to make handy dandy sound catchers? It's okay, you've got built-in sound catchers. All you do is you take your two hands like this, squeeze your fingers together, cup them, put them behind your ears and push your ears forward. You do this, your ears almost turn into deer ears and sound vibrations travel and they go through a series of bones and they go to the cochlea, which has little nerve endings, and it sends an impulse to your brain and you hear. And in the spring of the year, you'll hear all kinds of wonderful sounds. You might hear the sound of a chickadee. Everyone thinks chickadee says, chickadee dee dee, chickadee dee dee. And by the way, the more D's, the more danger. So that's its contact note. Chickadees use that to stay in touch with their buddies up in the tree when they can't see them, and also as their alarm call. But in the spring of the year, the male birds tilt their beak up and let go with a beautiful two-noted. So one of the things you can do to appreciate bird sound is start to develop some mnemonics. You'll find ideas in the book what that means. A mnemonic is a memory device. It's kind of hard to hang on to the sounds of birds, but if you put a little saying next to it, it just helps you remember. The chickadee, sweetie, the mourning dove, there's nothing to do. You might hear a cardinal. Let's wait for the truck to go by. Cheer, 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 party, party, party. Different suggestions. I also have some frog sounds too. The green frog, the toad, the peepers, beep, beep, beep. Once you get to know those sounds, when you're out in the woods listening for them, you'll begin to recognize them. And recognizing them starts you to think about them as your friends, as part of your neighborhood, your community. Our community shouldn't just be about buildings, houses, and people. It should also include the natural world that our neighbors too. And if we start to notice them and appreciate them, we'll tend and care for them. So, sound catch. Now, let's say you're going in the woods and let's say you do hear some chickadees. You can become a bird. Bird whisper calls birds in, and it's a sequence like this. And join me. It's a p and a sh. Try again. You do that enough times, stand very still, chickadees begin to move and they're curious. I've had as many as 60 chickadees almost within arm's reach because they're checking me out. Scientists think it's a bit of an alarm call and chickadees are just curious. And what they'll do is if there's an owl or a crow, they'll mob it. A bunch of them will begin harassing them so they fly away. So pay attention to the different sounds that are out there. Move along here. Now, when you're moving through the forest, ever notice how much noise we make? You know, our feet landing on crunchy sticks or dried leaves. Here's a trick for how to move more quietly. You crouch down. You grab your knees. Very gently lift up one foot. Put your toe down and roll the side of your foot. You practice doing that. You're not making any noise at all. This is the way traditional peoples used to hunt. It might take them 10, 15 minutes to move 100 meters because they're moving so slowly. And at any one point, they can freeze. So practice that. It's called stalking in the nicest form of the word stalking. I love this too. Yeah, I've always wanted to be a doctor, but life didn't take me in that direction. But I do have a stethoscope. And in the spring of the year, when the sap is rising, you can actually hear the sap rise. Take the stethoscope. You find a tree that's maybe this wide. Maples work well, birch do too. You put it there and you listen. And you'll hear some gurgling and popping. It has to be before the leaves bud out, when the sap is rising from the roots to the tree branches. But it's quite amazing how much you can hear. So try that. I'm a tree doctor. Let's see if you can detect the rising sap. Moving along, you know, next time you're at a cocktail party and you want to impress people, you can say, hey, are you a satiricist? And they'll say, what? They'll say, satiricism? You haven't heard of satiricism? Well, that is the ability to hear different sounds that the wind makes through tree branches. A satiricist can tell the difference just by the sound of a white pine versus an oak versus a trembling aspen. So next time you're going for a walk in a nearby park or the woods, slip your ears on and listen as the wind tickles the branches and really try to tune in to the different sound it makes. I call them wind songs. So can you appreciate the differences between the red oak? I don't know what kind of trees you have where you are. Maybe it's a Douglas fir, maybe it's one of the sequoias, but do they have a different quality of sound? Can you tune into those? Help kids remember different sounds. Well, you could try this yourself. You can create a homemade spectrograph. What that is on one axis, you've got the pitch. Is it lower or higher? And the other axis is time. You can take a pen and maybe if you're listening to, let's say, a robin, the American robin, which says, cheer up, cheer up. You can say, oh, the sound goes up. It rises and falls, goes down again, goes up, rises and falls. What does the sound look like? And by trying to isolate the pitch and the length of time, you really are able to remember it far better than not. So it's a tool to help you remember the different sounds you're hearing in nature. I think I forgot my micro trail. Let's see if we can find it. Just wandering through the woods here. Jacob's getting more and more forgetful. Yeah, that's where that was. Don't mind me. Now, I'm gonna bounce back to vision again because I lost track of where I was on the trail. But that's okay. You know, I'll tell you a story as we're walking. I loved taking my kids for a hike when they were small. I would put my little daughter on the shoulders. My son I would hold by the hand, and we would walk and walk. My favorite place to go was up on top of a ridge. There's this big bald rock called Rock Thunder. I would heave, I would sweat, trying to get to the top. And in the distance, there would be lakes glistening in the sun. There would be trees, hues of orange and gold that often come in the fall. And my kids, instead of looking at the vista, would be staring at their feet, looking at the ants. People sometimes have a view of nature which is very wide. We forget about the very small, and there's beauty and wonder in the very small. So to help you appreciate that, you can set up a micro trail. And all that involves is some yarn, popsicle stick, and sometimes I take a magnifying glass along. And instead of your trail being 1 kilometer long, your trail is maybe 10 meters long. The points of interest, you mark with popsicle stick. The trail is the yarn. So stop number 1 here. Some beautiful moss growing on the base of this old oak tree. And I just love moss. I love the feel of it. I love the texture. I love the smell. Follow along here. Now it takes us to these beautiful oak leaves. They're falling and are just starting to decompose. Some of them have been eaten by insects. Moving along here. Love the texture of the bark of ironwood, a very tough and hard wood. Moving along here, I found some old acorns with a cap on them. Maybe the squirrels missed that one, but did you know you can make a nice acorn whistle? All you do is take the cap, make a little V, just like that, and blow across. And there's an acorn whistle. How cool is that? Well, what else do I have along my trail? Oh, I think I went back to more bark beetle etching. So what discoveries can you make of the very small? Let's continue along. So Camp Kawartha, where I work, is a not-for-profit charity. And our mission is to foster stewardship. Kids who care for each other and care for the earth. And we're lucky enough to have about 10 acres on a lake. And across the road, we have another 185 acres to explore. And so we're walking one of the trails right now. It just happens to be next to a road, but it happens to have some beautiful trees. So sometimes you'll hear a car go by. Exploring nature, it's nice to get off the trail sometimes. And to do that, I use exploration dice. So on one block, I've got some numbers, 7, 10, 15, 20. On the other, I've got directions, and I roll them with kids. Oh, and that might say East 7. So we're going to go East 7. That means 7 steps to the east. So let's get oriented here. Okay, James, north. North is that way, which means west is that way, east is that way. So we're going to go 7 steps. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What this does, it bounces us around the landscape to places we might never have gotten to. And when you are at the number, you just hunker down. This is a good chance for us to try something called basement windows. So there are a whole bunch of wonderful insects and life underneath rocks and logs. And all we have to do to see them is just very carefully lift up the roof, lift up the window, and peek and see what's underneath. I don't know what's under. Oh, look at that. It's either red-backed salamander. It's a little guy. I don't know if you can see him. And I'll put him in my hand and then we'll let him go very gently. So he loves to live under rocks and logs, eating little tiny bugs that live there too. And of course, he's nicely colored. He doesn't have lungs. He breathes through his skin. And then he spends his whole life under the log. He even lays his eggs there. They hatch out. And I'm sure where you are, you have salamanders as well. I just love the way they move. You might find centipedes, earthworms. You might find a whole bunch of different things. Don't forget, when you're finished looking, really carefully close the window. Put the log back again so you don't hurt them. And I'm just going to let him go off the side. He'll crawl under when he's ready. That's called basement windows. And sometimes I use two-way magnifiers to help see them up close. All right, moving along. An underutilized sense is our sense of smell. We have an olfactory bulb The latest research suggests we can smell billions of distinct odors. Yet for some reason, we're out in the woods, we don't really take the time to sniff. We don't take the time to admire all the scents that are out there. Animals are good at that, humans not so much. But you can practice like a sommelier. And one way to enhance your sense of smell is if you take a sponge and you moisten your upper lip. The moistness helps you to smell better. Okay, you won't smell better, but you'll smell more, if you know what I mean. And you can create a little smell cocktail. What I mean is you get a cup and then just try to find different things with different scents. Maybe it's a tiny bit of moss. Now, I always talk about the honorable harvest, which means if we're ever taking things from nature, we only take a little bit from here and a little bit from there. And if we can, we try to give back. And often I'll take wildflower seeds with me and scatter them as a thank you, as gratitude. So I might put in a bit of moss. I might put in a bit of soil. I might put in, oh, here's a trout lily leaf, maybe some dried leaves. And each of those things has a distinctive odor. And then what I can do is take a stick and just mush it. And when I do that, I'm releasing the scent. And I've created a little cocktail. This one I call Forest Wonder. Take a smell there, James. Does that smell good?
Mm-hmm.
Now, a farmer can tell you how healthy the soil is by smelling the soil. And different types of soil smell this. You smell the soil of a woodland versus a meadow versus a, let's say, your garden. They all have their distinctive odors. So practice that. The other thing you can do is a little scratch and sniff or rub and sniff. So take your 2 fingers and rub them. Rub them against bark and sniff. Rub them along, I don't know, maybe a seed, a dried leaf. See how many distinctive odors you can get. New leaves that are just coming out. Do they have an odor? So you got some trillium growing here. Isn't that lovely? Here's some kids. They're finally coming back to us, and right now they're busy climbing and cheering each other on. So that's heartening to hear the sound of the children enjoying themselves. That's great. All right. Here's something that we can do. Little lemon extract, mint extract, maple extract. Foxes have an incredible olfactory bulb. They can smell 10,000 times better than we can. They can follow scent trails. For people to experience following a scent trail, you can actually take some extract and drizzle it. A few drops here, a few drops there, a few drops there. And at the very end, I'll often hide a little candy, just like a fox following the trail of a mouse and finally eating it. So you can do it in large sweeping loops. You can have them crisscross, you know, maybe this is the lemon extract trail. That's the maple extract trail. That's the almond extract trail. And see how well people can follow it. It doesn't last long, so you have to immediately come back again. One thing I love doing is what I call scent pouches. We all think evergreens, the conifers smell similar. But in fact, if you were to take the time to smell cedar versus fir versus spruce versus hemlock versus pine, they all have their distinctive odor. So what I'll do is I'll collect some needles and I'll put them in a bag, and I'll make sure that people can't really see the needles. And then I'll get them to sniff and see if they can find that smell somewhere in the forest, just to appreciate the different aromas that different trees have. Also something called pheromonia. What I do is I take some incense and I put it in a jar, and then I light it, glass jar with sand in it. I make sure that the incense is below the level of the jar. And then we're going for a walk. I'm trying to see if we can detect the scent. So this is like moths. Moths will release an odor and it's called a pheromone. So the males will release the odor, or the females, sorry, will release the odor. The males have these big feathery antennae, and they can pick up that odor 3 kilometers away and track the female and find them so they can mate. So you could have some different scent jars along the way, and maybe at night or at dusk, you hide them along the trail, you burn them so they're safe in the jar. And can people locate the scent, just like a moth would? All right. You know, we were born to touch the world around us. To crammed in our fingertips are 9,000 Mesner's corpuscles, so we can detect pressure and heat and pain. 9,000 Mesner's corpuscles per square centimeter of skin. You could have a feely bag. So come on over here.
At 5 minutes, Jacob.
Okay. Just put some different things in of nature inside your feely bag and make sure the neck is tight so that your hand can go in, but you can't see it. Don't put things like scorpions and porcupines in there. But, you know, can you, just through your sense of touch, figure out what's there? Bone. This one. Yeah. Piece of wood. You might slip a pine cone in there, or maybe a pretty rock. Can you, just using your sense of touch, figure out what's in there? A snail shell. Snail shell. So give that a try. And also, in my book, I have a couple of scavenger hunts. This one is for touch. So can you find something that's moist, something that's cool, something that's fuzzy, something that's silky, something that's light, heavy, soft? And even just like you were doing with the scratches that you can rub and really appreciate the different textures. Can you detect the differences in bark between, let's say, an oak tree versus a maple versus an ash? Can you feel the texture of soil? Is it really fine? Is it granular? What about a dry heap? How does that feel? Well, there is also other senses too, sense of taste. Actually, be careful with that one because I don't want people just to start willy-nilly cramming things in their mouth and tasting it. But if you know what you're doing, there's lots in the forest that you can harvest. For example, trout lily, when it first comes out, you can eat just a little bit. There's cattails, dandelion, cattails. You just, wherever it's not close to a road and the water is pure, just gently pull up one, and you can peel the very bottom. The inside tastes like celery. Dandelions, of course, the new leaves that are growing are delicious and chock full of vitamin C and other vitamins. Eat locally, eat seasonally, savor the different tastes of the forest. Now, of course, there are people who can blend senses. They're called synesthesists. Synesthesia. So they can hear colors, they can smell sound. Maybe you're one of them. You never knew. So next time you're in the forest, give that a try. See if you can blend senses. Now, of course, I have a lot of props here. You don't need props. At the very least, walk outside, kick your shoes off, sit down. Let your feet touch the earth and feel the energy of the earth. Smell the soil that's right next to you. Feel the texture of the leaves. Listen to the wind as it's going through the treetops. Listen for bird song. Listen for anything else rustling in the woods. Smell. What is the scent of the place that you're? Could you recognize that place again if you came back to it with your eyes closed because of its smell? But the more we do this, the more we go into nature with all of our senses opened up, just getting rid of the clutter that's in our head and really trying to be part of the natural world, the more we'll feel better, we'll feel more complete, and hopefully the more we'll treat nature with the love and respect that it deserves. Thanks very much.
Wow, thank you, Jacob. That was awesome. I think that was a lot more than a lot of us expected. It was beautiful, and it was really cool for me growing up on the West Coast to see a forest in Eastern Canada. It's not something I get to see all the time personally. We have a ton of questions coming in, so we can get right to those. I have one first, which is just a curiosity about what brought you to nature yourself. Was it experiences in your childhood, or did you come to it later in life?
Oh, it was definitely growing up. I was a wild child. My parents kicked me out, and I wasn't allowed to come back until the sun was going down and it was supper time, and then I was kicked out again. So I spent awesome amounts of time just exploring. I remember one time I was skating on a creek and I fell through up to my neck. I managed to scamper out. I ran home to get warm, and then my dad said, "What happened to you, kid?" And I said, "I fell through the ice." He said, "Oh, be careful next time." So I credit my parents with giving me permission and trusting me to explore nature for my love for nature. So I hope you as parents and educators give kids a chance to explore nature too.
Well, that's a very timely message for me personally, because my son, who just got his driver's license, left with 5 friends yesterday off to Sommelier Beach, where there's no cell service, and it's at this, I believe it's the start of the West Coast Trail. It's the Wanda Fuqua Park. So I've been a bit nervous about it, but I figure as long as they don't climb any waterfalls, we should.
Well, and here's what we have to rail against: this administrator saying the outdoors is dangerous. It's not.
Yeah, that's
If
not,
we
no.
equip kids to learn how to be in the outdoors, there's way more benefit from being outdoors. You know, we tolerate driving in cars. There's a 1 in 80 chance we'll get into an accident. Every 10 minutes, someone falls down and hurts themselves, falls down stairs. We tolerate stairs. We just need to show people that nature is an essential part of childhood, and kids have a right to be in nature.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Thank you. Okay, so I'll get to a couple of questions here that have come in from the audience. And we'll start with Paul, who asked on Zoom. His question: what are some ways that primary teachers can stimulate a sense of personal responsibility and custodianship of nature among their 7 and 8-year-old students?
What a great question. And think about this. To want to do something, to engage in action, you have to love it first. So the very first thing you can do as a primary teacher, get kids to go out to the same place over and over again. So they get to know that place, they get to know the faces, the characters, the stories, and then say, whoa, you know, what can we do to improve this place? Could we plant something? Could we put up butterfly houses? Be careful not to give kids problems that they just don't have the cognitive ability to solve. So talking about climate change with little 1-year-olds or grade 1s, I don't think that's the time. I think the time to cultivate a love and that strong relationship with the earth first, and then advocacy will follow.
Great. That's great advice. Although I'm not a primary teacher, so I'll let Paul respond to that, but I think that's applicable to parents as well and grandparents.
Yeah, think about agency, you know, that you want to empower a kid and you want to give them hope. And you can do that by engaging in really little bits of action right in your own backyard, in your schoolyard. How can you make your schoolyard a more nature-rich place? How can we leave it better than we found it? You know, people who are involved in the environmental education field talk too much about reducing harm and not enough about doing more good. So what good can you do? How can you leave the space that you're occupying better than you found it?
What would you say for people who, you know, there's certainly people who may not have the same access to the outdoors as others. So for us, we live on Vancouver Island here. It's easy for us to kind of walk out our door and find green spaces, but that's not necessarily true for everybody. Or there may be people that have mobility issues.
Sure.
Are there ways that they can find to connect to nature without having that sort of at their fingertips?
Sure. You can always open up your senses wherever you are. If you're on the balcony of a high rise, you still feel the wind and smell the scents. You can bring nature to you. So a planter box or a little herbarium that has things growing in it, flowers, vegetables that you grow. These are all things you can do that get you in touch with life and as life grows. And we need life around us. It needs to be right within reach everywhere. And I think that's the answer. You know, people think climate change is the problem. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. And the symptom is our broken relationships to nature. So the more we infuse our built environments with the natural world, with natural systems, the more we include. We talk about inclusion, but we're forgetting we need to include nature in our lives. How does that work? You know, rewilding, planting. When we build new buildings, making sure we don't knock nature over, but we include part of it. And all of us are custodians and caretakers, and all of us have a duty and responsibility to make things better, to make them more nature rich.
So someone else was asking here if there's particular nature apps that you would recommend to be able to hear bird sounds or identify plants or insects.
Oh, there's so many great ones. You can start with iNaturalist, which is free. And iNaturalist, you take a picture of something and it'll tell you what it is. There's eBird, which you can report on the bird sightings. There's FrogWatch. There's literally dozens of nature apps out there. And in the big book of nature activities, not this book, we list many, many of them.
Okay, great. And oh, I'm not going to be able to say the word correctly. Somebody did write it in the chat. The hearing the trees whisper and then be able to identify them from their sound.
Yeah, sathuricism. It starts with a P. I would never guess sathuricism starts with a P, but it does, and it's in my book, and I describe how to do that.
Okay, so there's sathuricism. Okay, and so somebody here is asking if there's a way to do that with the trees here on the West Coast. Do they?
Sure. Every tree has its own sound. You just go to a windy spot, sit underneath it, and really try to tune into that particular tone and that particular sound. And it might be sequoias, cedars, I don't know, yews, not sure what's out there.
And then this Sarah Duncan also asks if you can share the history of the honorable harvest idea.
Oh, it's a love comes from braiding sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer. And if ever there's a book you should read, don't read mine, but read that one. She really talks about how First Nations have had a positive and reciprocal relationship with the land and how that's so much part of their culture. And what we need first ways of Indigenous ways of knowing. That's the answer to many of our problems, is just having a new respect for the living systems around us, for Earth, for our ancestors, and for those yet to be born. And she talks about that in a beautiful way. And she has a chapter on the honorable harvest.
Great. And then someone else is asking, this is Kate, how long should a nature walk last for preschool children?
Oh, I think with preschool children, you let them explore. And as long as they're interested. So going for a walk, if they're bent over something, there's a little activity I love to do. I get everyone to have a leaf. And I say, hey, you know, Sherlock Holmes, that famous detective, Watson would often ask him, how does she get to solve all those mysteries? And Sherlock Holmes would say, my dear Watson, you see, but you do not notice. So you take a leaf and you say, I noticed that. And a little preschool might be able to do this too. I noticed that it's colored brown on one side, but it's lighter brown on the other. I know it's got these veins. I notice the stem isn't quite round. I notice it's got a knob on the end. And the next part of the sequence is, I wonder why this leaf is brown. I wonder why it fell off the tree. I wonder what it's going to become. Those wonder questions drive curiosity. And the last thing it reminds me of that new leaves will grow. It reminds me that there'll be a resurgence of spring. So that sequence from noticing to wondering to building relationships between things, that's so important for a child.
That's great. So it basically nature's for everybody, and you can find something that is relatable. I mean, I found that when my son was young and he was getting overwhelmed with going to this lesson or this class, we would go up to, it was called the Collier Dam, and in 2 minutes being there, it was like a different person. He just had his hand in the dirt, and it just changed him. And that brings up the question nature and mental health and how it affects our mental health. And this is Mental Health Awareness Month as well. And I'm wondering if there's ways for you, if you find that nature helps your mental health personally.
Oh my gosh, if I'm without nature for a while, then I feel sad and depressed. Vitamin N, vitamin nature, Richard Louv called it. And we all need it every day. And that is, our senses help with that. They help us just reconnect with what's around us. And we were born to sense the world. And right now, we all suffer from sensory anesthesia. Just those other senses are being ignored. So open up your senses, drink the world in, and you'll feel better.
Great advice. Thank you. And then we have time for one or two more questions, and a couple of them I'm going to combine because they're about the book. And one person is asking if all of these activities are in the book.
And indeed, they are.
And he was asking if they can be adapted for all ages. And I would just point out that the subtitle is 70 sensory activities for all ages. So they definitely.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping it's kind of like a toolkit, and you just pick the right ones for the age group that you have that you think they'll enjoy. And at the very end, I have suggested hikes of how you can put them together in a sequence.
Wonderful. So I'm just waiting for Nicole to let us know who our book winner is today. And while I do that, I'll remind everybody that you can receive a 20% discount on the Book of Nature Connection, as well as the Big Book of Nature activities, using the code that Nicole has put up there. I think it's Nature 20. We also have another virtual event, May 19th, with Bevan Cohen, and that is about the complete guide to seed and nut oils, growing, foraging, and pressing. So you can sign up for that via Eventbrite. And we really thank you for your time, everybody, and taking the time out of your day to join us. And yes, this is being recorded. If you signed up via, registered for the event, you will receive it in your inbox, and it will also appear on YouTube in a few days. So the winner of the book, I keep calling it the big book, but the Book of Nature Connection is Susan. I don't know if they have a last name, but Susan, we will reach out to you and get your details for receiving that book. So we thank you so much, Jacob. We thank you, James, behind the scenes as well as Nicole, who's been running things as well. And we really appreciate your time, Jacob. And I think this is a first for us, getting to go out in the woods with somebody online. So thank you so much. And remember, everybody, to unplug and plug into nature.
That's right. Plug into nature through your senses. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.